Don't be afraid.
This is the story of how I almost died as a kid home alone, and how one of the worst nights of my life somehow managed to keep getting worse. We were a family of 5. I was 10, my older brother was 14, and my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night. My brother was out with his friends, almost certainly up to no good because the dreaded call every parent fears came in. I was in my room playing a Star Wars game on the PlayStation when I heard my mom suddenly start screaming and crying. My stomach dropped. I paused the game and ran out to see what was happening. She was on the phone with a hospital. They were calling to say my brother had been hit by a car. The rest of the conversation is a blur. I just remember my mom falling apart, my dad trying to calm her down, and both of them throwing on coats in a panic. I heard something about my brother's leg being broken. My dad kept repeating that he was going to be okay, talking my mom down as he grabbed his keys. Seeing him so steady actually calmed me. I figured my mom was just reacting like any mom would when she hears car accident and hospital. They scooped my little sister out of her room. Then, right before they left, they asked if I'd be okay staying home alone. I said yes. I was terrified for my brother, but the idea of seeing him in a hospital bed scared me even more. I think they didn't want us kids seeing him like that either, but they couldn't leave a 5-year-old alone. For the record, my brother recovered completely. His injury doesn't matter to the rest of this story, except for the fact that it's why I ended up alone in the house that Friday night. After they left, their car screeching out of the driveway, I went back to my room and lost myself in the Star Wars game for a couple more hours. By then, it was well past midnight, way later than my usual bedtime. I switched off the TV and PlayStation, crawled into bed with my Game Boy, and kept playing under the covers. Somewhere in there, I heard the front door open. My bedroom door was closed. I immediately shut off my Game Boy and lay still, listening. I expected to hear my parents' voices, maybe even my brother's, or the familiar sound of them coming up the stairs. Nothing. No footsteps. No talking. Just the house settling. After a few very long minutes, a feeling of wrongness crept in. I slid out of bed, quietly turned the doorknob, and eased the door open. Then I tiptoed to the upstairs landing that overlooked the living room. The lights downstairs were off, but 3 tall figures were standing in our living room. They weren't my family. I went cold. For a second, I couldn't move at all. Finally, I forced myself to back away, step by step, and retreat to my bedroom. I pulled the door closed as carefully as I could, but it still gave a tiny, unmistakable click. I knew they had heard it. Heart hammering, I went straight to my closet. I opened it, slipped inside, and pulled the door shut behind me. I crawled behind a wall of boxes and garbage bags filled with clothes. From the outside, you probably wouldn't have seen me at all unless you were really looking. Then I waited. It felt like an eternity before my bedroom door finally opened. In that instant, I was certain I was going to die. I heard footsteps cross the room. I couldn't tell if it was one person or more. The mattress rustled as someone messed with my covers, maybe checking if I was in bed. Then silence. The footsteps moved again, this time toward the closet. They stopped right on the other side of the door. Several seconds ticked by, each one stretching forever. Then the closet door slowly opened. My heart was lodged in my throat. I didn't look up. I didn't move. I barely let myself breathe. The door stayed open. 10 seconds, 15, 20, just open with someone there looking in. Then it closed. Footsteps retreated. I heard them leave my room. I stayed frozen in that closet for what had to be another hour, too scared to come out, replaying that moment over and over. When I finally lifted my head, I realized that from where I was wedged behind the boxes, you probably couldn't see me easily, especially in the dark. Maybe I'd been completely hidden, Or maybe whoever opened that door did see me and just decided not to do anything. Eventually, I heard a car in the driveway and my parents' voices. I bolted out of the closet, out of my room, and down the stairs. The front door was still slightly open. Several of our valuables were gone. In their rush to get to the hospital, my parents had never locked the door. I was lucky. That's the only word for it. Lucky not to have been taken or killed. To this day, I wonder about the person who opened that closet door and just stood there. Did he see me and leave me alone because he was only there to rob the place, not hurt anyone? Or did he simply miss me behind the clutter? And I only survived because of a few cardboard boxes and trash bags in the right place. It was a cold November night in 2021 when I decided to take my dog Max for a late walk. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas, not far from a stretch of woods. I've always liked how calm it is at night, just the wind, rustling leaves, and the occasional owl. But that night felt wrong from the start, even before I realized why. Max and I followed our usual path. His leash hung loosely in my hand as he sniffed around, trotting ahead and circling back like he always does. Everything seemed normal until we neared the edge of the woods. That's where Max stopped dead. He went rigid, every muscle tensed, and let out a low, steady growl. I followed his gaze. A dark figure stood at the tree line. At first, I thought it might be someone who'd wandered in and gotten turned around. It happens sometimes. People get lost in those woods. "Hey, you need help," I called. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. It was just a tall, black outline against an even darker wall of trees. No face, no features, nothing I could make out. My chest tightened, but I tried to stay rational. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe I was overreacting. "Max, let's go," I said, tugging gently on his leash. He resisted, still growling, then reluctantly followed when I started back toward home. I kept my pace easy at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That's when I noticed it. The figure was moving too, not walking exactly. More like sliding along the edge of the trees, always just inside the shadow line. Every time I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it kept pace. I told myself it had to be a trick of light, shadows shifting with the wind, branches swaying. But my hands were shaking, and Max's growl deepened into something I'd never heard from him before. By the time we reached my street, I was practically jogging. I kept glancing back. The figure never left the tree line. It just stopped and watched. When I reached my house, I fumbled with my keys. My fingers were numb from the cold and from adrenaline. Finally, the lock clicked and Max and I bolted inside. I slammed the door, locked it, checked it twice, then switched off the lights. I stood in the dark listening. The only sound was Max's heavy breathing and my own heart pounding. I told myself it was over, that whoever, or whatever, it was had stayed in the woods. But the feeling of eyes on me wouldn't go away. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound outside my window. At first, I wrote it off as wind, but as I lay there listening, it separated itself from the usual creaks. It was whispering. Too deliberate, too clear to be the wind. Low, constant, like a voice carried just wrong enough that I couldn't pick out words. My stomach churned. I crept to the window and parted the blinds. The same figure stood just outside my yard. Its head was tilted to one side, like it was listening to something only it could hear. It looked like it was speaking to someone, but there was no one else there. Just that tall shape under the weak glow of the streetlight. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the grass. I backed away from the window, heart in my throat, and grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I called the police and stammered that someone was outside my house. They told me to stay on the line. The wait felt endless, but the patrol car actually arrived pretty fast. I watched from the window as the blue and red lights washed over my street. 2 officers got out and approached the figure. They shouted commands, their voices professional and calm. The figure didn't run, didn't fight. It just stood there as they cuffed it and walked it to the car. A few minutes later, one of the officers came to my door. He told me they'd taken the man into custody. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. Why was he out there? The officer hesitated. It's strange, he said. He's been reported missing for years. We think he's been living in the woods. He's not saying much. I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing. Why had he been following me? Who or what had he been whispering to? The officer assured me they'd investigate. His words didn't help much. I barely slept the rest of that night. Every gust of wind made me tense. Every small noise sounded like whispering at the window. I kept seeing that smooth, unnatural way he'd moved and the way he'd stayed out of the light. The next morning, I kept checking out the window, half expecting to see him standing there again. He wasn't. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. I don't walk Max late at night anymore. I refuse to go near the woods in the dark. The police never told me much else, but a neighbor mentioned they'd taken the man to a psychiatric hospital. Sometimes I tell myself, he was just a broken person who lost his grip on reality in those woods. Other times I wonder if something else found him out there first and just let him follow me home for a while. Before the next story starts, imagine the narrator pausing a video and saying, "If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss upcoming scary stories. Share them with friends and family. We really do depend on that support." In 2023, I was living in a rough part of New York City. During the day, the streets were loud and crowded, but at night they went strangely quiet in a way that never felt entirely safe. I worked a late shift at a small downtown office, usually clocking out around 11 p.m. It wasn't the best routine for staying alive in that neighborhood, but it paid my rent. One cold November evening, I headed into work like usual. I kept my car in an underground parking garage a few blocks away. It was dim, echoey, and usually almost empty by the time I got there. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my bag, and started walking toward the elevator. That's when I noticed him. A man stood a few rows away near a parked car. At first, I thought he was just unlocking it, but his movements were off. Slow, deliberate, like he was trying to force the door open without making too much noise. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say something. Another part wanted to mind my own business and get through my shift. Before I could decide, he looked up and saw me. His face was partially hidden by the bad lighting, but I felt his eyes on me. He didn't say anything, didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Not running, not hurrying, just a quick, steady walk, like he didn't want attention but also didn't want to seem like he was sneaking away. A knot of unease stayed with me, but I forced myself to let it go. I had work to do. The shift was normal, boring even. I filed reports, answered a few emails, tried not to think about the guy in the garage. By the time 11 p.m. rolled around, I was more tired than anxious. When I got back to the parking lot, it was even emptier. My footsteps echoed too loud in the stillness. I scanned the rows automatically, half expecting to see that man again. Nothing. I got in my car, locked the doors on instinct, and started the engine. The silence felt heavier than usual, but I chalked it up to nerves. I pulled out and headed home. The streets were mostly deserted. Highway lights blurred past. The low hum of the engine was weirdly soothing, and I started to relax. About 10 minutes into the drive, I heard something from behind me. It was faint at first, like fabric shifting or someone lightly moving their weight. My heart ticked up a notch, but I told myself it was just the car. A bag sliding, the seat creaking, something normal. Then I heard it again. Louder this time, definitely movement. My chest tightened. I glanced at the rearview mirror. There, in the shadows of the back seat, sat the man from the parking garage. He was watching me. His face was expressionless, but everything about him was coiled and tense. My hands clamped on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I had no idea what to do. Slam the brakes, floor it, jump out. Before I could do anything, he spoke. "Keep driving," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made my stomach turn over. I did as he said. My thoughts scrambled. How long had he been there? How had I not seen him get in? Had he slipped into the car before my shift and waited the whole time? "Pull over by those trees," he said after a minute. pointing to a dark, isolated patch at the side of the road. I swallowed hard and obeyed, praying he just wanted money. As soon as we stopped, he pulled a gun from his jacket. "Wallet. Phone," he said in that same cold, almost conversational tone. I handed them over with shaking hands. He stared at me for a few seconds, unreadable, then opened the door and stepped out. Before he disappeared into the darkness, he leaned back in and said, "If you call the cops, I'll find you." Then he was gone, swallowed by the trees. I sat there paralyzed for a long time. When I finally managed to breathe again, I drove to the nearest gas station with my heart still slamming against my ribs. The bright fluorescent lights felt like a shield. I went inside, told the cashier what had happened, and asked to use the phone. He slid it over without a word, eyes wide. The police arrived quickly. I told them everything. The man in the parking garage, how he must have hidden in my car, the gun, the threat. They checked the area near the trees, but of course he was long gone. "You're lucky he didn't hurt you," one of the officers said, his tone grim. I nodded, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed. The drive home from the gas station was the longest I've ever taken. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound from the back seat made me jump. For weeks afterward, I checked the rear seats and trunk every single time I got in my car, day or night. I still do, if I'm honest. The money and the phone weren't what bothered me. What haunted me was how close he had been, for how long, without me having any idea. I was 14 when it happened. My mom worked long overnight shifts as a nurse, and my older brother was away at college. That meant I was often home alone on weekends. At the time, it felt normal, just part of getting older, having the house to myself. One Saturday night, I invited Molly over. We were more than friends, though we hadn't really defined what we were. We spent the evening upstairs in my room, watching movies, making dumb jokes, and pretending not to be awkward around each other. My bedroom overlooked the backyard deck. From my window, you could see the whole thing. Molly had to leave around 10 p.m. because her parents were strict about curfews. We hugged goodbye at the door, and suddenly the house felt much quieter. I went back to my room, half watching TV while scrolling on my phone. The glow of the screen and the background noise of the show made the empty house feel less lonely. At some point, a sound cut through the TV, the scrape of a chair dragging across the wooden deck below my window. It was loud and intentional, not the kind of noise the wind makes. I froze for a second, then got up and went to the window. I pulled the curtain back and looked down. Someone was sitting in one of the deck chairs. The porch was mostly dark, but a bit of light spilled over from the neighbor's yard. The figure was in shadow, but I could make out the shape of a person lounging in the chair. For a split second, I thought maybe Molly had come back for something she'd forgotten, even though it didn't make much sense. "Molly," I called softly through the glass. The figure tilted its head up toward my window. It wasn't her. Even in the dim light, I could tell it was a grown man. His face was partly hidden by shadow, but I could feel his stare lock onto me. It wasn't just looking. It was like he was pushing his gaze into my room. I dropped back behind the curtain, heart racing. I grabbed my phone and fired off messages in the group chat. "Are any of you at my house right now?" I typed. "Because if this is a prank, it's not funny." Replies came fast. A string of confusion, laughing emojis, and jokes about me scaring myself with horror movies. Nobody owned up to being there. And honestly, none of my friends were the type to sneak over just to freak me out, which meant this guy was a stranger. Fear warred with curiosity. I eased the curtain aside again and peeked out. He was still there, same chair, same position, looking right at my window. He wasn't moving, just sitting, staring. I forced my voice to sound stronger than I felt. "What do you want?" I called down. He didn't answer at first. Then his shoulders began to shake. It took me a second to realize he was laughing, this weird, silent laughter that finally leaked out in thin, breathy wheezes. The sound barely reached me, but it was enough. "Please go away," I shouted, trying to sound forceful. My voice cracked. He didn't leave. He slowly leaned back in the chair and tilted his head at an odd angle, like he was mocking me. I slammed the window shut and yanked the curtains closed. My hands were shaking. I backed away and sat on my bed, hugging my knees, staring at the window as if something might come bursting through it. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a man sitting in my backyard looking at me. It sounded ridiculous. Still, every instinct I had told me something was very wrong. Time crawled. The TV droned on, but I wasn't really hearing it. The house felt too quiet, every little creak magnified. Then I heard it. The back door handle rattling. My blood went cold. I jumped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The handle jiggled again, harder this time, followed by a dull thump like he was testing the lock. I clapped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My breathing came in shallow gasps. I listened, straining to pick up every noise. The rattling stopped. I started to let myself hope he'd given up, until I heard footsteps crunching along the side of the house on the gravel path. He was heading for the front door. The faint metallic clink of the doorknob turning reached me, followed by the soft push of someone leaning into the door. Thankfully, my mom always locked both the knob and the deadbolt. After a few tries, everything went silent. I backed away from the stairs and bolted to my room, slamming the door and locking it. My fingers shook so badly it took me a couple tries. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the dialer, thumb hovering over 911. I hesitated, terrified of overreacting and equally terrified of doing nothing. Downstairs, the front door creaked faintly, then was quiet again. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. No more rattling, no more footsteps. Just the house settling and the faint buzz of electronics. I stayed awake the entire night like that, curled up with my phone clutched in my hand, flinching at every sound. When my mom finally came home around 9 a.m., I completely broke down and told her everything. She was furious that I hadn't called the police. Looking back, I understand why. At the time, I'd been paralyzed, too scared to move, too scared to decide. The man never came back. We never found out who he was or what he wanted. But from that night on, being home alone never felt the same again. I've spent my entire adult life as a police officer. For as long as I can remember, I've worked the 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. shift in Fairfax County, in Reston, Virginia. Law enforcement wasn't exactly my childhood dream, but it paid the bills, and over time it became part of my identity, especially because of the tight bond I built with the people I worked with. This past September, on a clear, mild morning, I got a call that at first seemed routine. Around 10 a.m., dispatch relayed a request from a mental health professional for a welfare check on a 33-year-old woman named Sydney Wilson. The report said she'd been agitated and behaving in ways that worried them. I took the call. Welfare checks are usually straightforward. Knock on the door, talk to the person, make sure they're safe, leave. I drove to her apartment complex, a small, modest building on a quiet side street. Nothing about it stood out. It looked like 100 other places in the district. At her door, I knocked firmly. Police department. Anyone home? After a few seconds, the door creaked open halfway. A woman stood there, half hidden behind it. Her eyes darted around like she was searching the hallway for something or someone only she could see. "Hi, ma'am," I started. "I'm Officer Lou. I'm here to check on." Before I could finish, she muttered something under her breath, too low for me to catch, then slammed the door and locked it. I stood there, thrown off. She hadn't seemed angry exactly, just unsettled, frantic. It didn't sit right. I knocked again, louder. No response. I kept knocking every 20 seconds or so, calling out, trying to get her to come back to the door. About 2 minutes passed like that. Then the door slowly opened again. She stepped out this time, standing fully in the doorway. Her expression was impossible to read. "How are you?" she asked, suddenly chipper, like we were strangers meeting in a grocery store. I barely had time to register the whiplash in her demeanor before she lunged. I saw a flash of metal, then felt the white-hot sting as the knife sliced across my forehead. I stumbled backward, instinct kicking in. My hand flew to my head and came away warm and wet with blood. It wasn't gushing, but it was enough to let me know she'd opened me up. She stood in her doorway gripping the knife in both hands, mumbling to herself in a string of words I couldn't make out. I drew my gun, leveled it at her, and shouted, "Drop the knife, back up." She didn't back up. She stepped toward me. I walked backward, trying to maintain distance, keeping my voice loud and clear. "Drop the knife, I'm warning you." It was like she couldn't hear me. She lunged again and slashed twice more, catching my face both times. Pain blurred my vision and tears stung my eyes, but training took over. I fired 2 rounds. Both missed, tearing into the wall behind her. She didn't flinch. She reached for me, wild and desperate, knife still in hand. I fired again, 3 shots. All 3 hit her in the upper body. She staggered, dropped the knife, and crumpled to the floor. "Shots fired, suspect down, requesting medical, immediate," I said into my radio, forcing my voice to stay as steady as possible as I gave my location. Blood trickled down my face in warm streams, but it wasn't pouring. It was more of a steady ooze. I knew then that my injuries, while painful, probably weren't fatal. Backup arrived within minutes. So did paramedics. One team focused on me, getting me onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. Another worked on Sydney. At the hospital, the adrenaline started to ebb and the reality crashed in. I had shot someone, killed someone. Doctors cleaned and closed the gashes on my forehead and face with stitches. They told me I'd make a full physical recovery. The emotional part was harder. Later, I found out that Sydney had been pronounced dead at the hospital. The news hit like a punch to the chest. I replayed the entire encounter over and over in my head, looking for the moment where I could have done something different. Every time I ran up against the same thing, she'd left me with no good options. It was her or me. Knowing that logically didn't make it easier. For days, I couldn't sleep more than an hour or 2 at a time. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, seeing her rushing at me with the knife. My coworkers did their best to reassure me, telling me it was a justified shoot, that I'd followed protocol, that I'd done what I had to do to go home alive. They were right, and eventually internal affairs and the review board said the same. The shooting was justified. But that doesn't erase the fact that a woman died by my hand in a quiet hallway on a sunny September morning. That stays with you. For a while, I worked as the caretaker of a small, old church in a quiet town. It wasn't glamorous work, sweeping floors, polishing pews, fixing whatever broke, but there were peaceful moments. The church itself was over 100 years old. It looked exactly like you'd picture a tiny town church. Tall, weathered stone, a bell tower that chimed at odd intervals, and a small cemetery pressed up beside it. I was there almost every day. I knew the building inside and out. Even so, something about it always made me vaguely uneasy, especially when I was alone. One afternoon, I was finishing up chores, the sun dipping low and throwing long shadows across the graveyard outside. The wind had picked up, making the trees in the cemetery sway and creak. The air felt different than usual, heavier, like it was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, a faint sound inside the church that didn't belong. This place was full of normal noises, old wood settling, pipes knocking, distant traffic. But this was different. It sounded like soft whispering. At first I told myself it was just wind sneaking through cracks in the walls. But the longer I stood still and listened, the clearer it became. Voices, low and hurried, words I couldn't understand, like a language I'd never heard before. I turned slowly, scanning the empty pews, the altar, the shadowed corners. Nobody. Up high on the wall near the ceiling was a small window that faced toward the cemetery. I glanced up at it and froze. Through the glass, near the cemetery gate by the old iron door that opened onto the road, stood a figure. It was small, too small to be an adult. It had to be a child. The way it stood there, perfectly still, sent a chill down my spine. Even with the fading light making details hard to see, I had the strong impression it was a girl. My heart started pounding. I couldn't look away. I wanted to go outside to see who she was, but my legs wouldn't move. She just stood there, staring straight ahead. Not at the church, not at the road, just forward, unmoving. I watched her for what felt like forever. Finally, I forced myself to move and headed for the door. By the time I stepped outside, she was gone. The cemetery was completely empty. No sign of movement, no small figure by the gate. I tried to reason it away. I was tired, I'd been working too much. The strange whispers had primed my imagination, but the unease wouldn't leave. When I went back inside, the whispering was still there, louder now. The voices seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the rafters, the walls, the floorboards beneath my feet. They echoed in a way that made it impossible to pin down where they originated. I backed away, eyes fixed on the altar. The candles I'd lit earlier flickered, making shadows stretch and twist up the walls into warped, inhuman shapes. And then, in the edge of my vision, I saw her again. The same small figure, this time inside the church, standing near the old wooden pews. She was moving now, slowly, one careful step at a time, walking toward me. I couldn't move. As she came closer, I could see her face, pale skin, eyes wide and unblinking, locked directly on mine. Her mouth hung slightly open, but no sound came out. She wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning. Her expression was empty, like a photograph of a person instead of the person themselves. My muscles tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stayed rooted to the spot. She stopped a few feet in front of me. Then she lifted one arm and pointed toward the cemetery. Her finger trembled. Her eyes never left mine. I had no idea what she wanted, no idea what that gesture meant. I just stared back, frozen. And then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, she was gone. 1 second she was there. The next, I was alone in the aisle, the only sound the wind outside and my own uneven breathing. My whole body was shaking. I felt sweat crawl down my back despite the cool air. There was no explanation that made sense. I couldn't stay in there another second. I ran out of the church, my footsteps echoing off stone, and went straight to the cemetery. I scanned every row of headstones, every patch of ground, looking for any sign of a little girl. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no movement, no figure by the gate. It was as though she had never been there at all. I stayed outside for a long time, watching the cemetery, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The world stayed quiet. But from that day on, I never shook the feeling that something was wrong with that place. Something tied to the church, the graves, and that silent girl pointing me toward the dead. I'm 30 now, and I share a house with my sister, Jasmine. It's a 2-story mother-daughter setup, 2 separate living spaces stacked on top of each other, each with its own kitchen. Jasmine has the downstairs apartment. I live upstairs. She's not home much. She spends most nights at her boyfriend, Matt's place about 20 minutes away. I like to think I'm not easily scared, but I'll admit, being alone in this big house can get under my skin sometimes. One night I was by myself, stretched out on the couch, watching a horror movie. My apartment is open concept. The living room, kitchen, and dining area all share one big space. The couch sits in the middle, facing the TV, with my back to most of the room. The only light came from the TV's eerie glow. It threw strange shadows into the corners, making the emptiness feel crowded. Every so often I glanced over my shoulder. Just a reflex, I told myself. Still, something about all that open space behind me always gave me the uneasy feeling that someone could be standing just out of sight. I blamed the movie. After it ended, I did my nightly routine, brushed my teeth, shut off the lights, and went to bed. I fell asleep quickly. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my sister's voice. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it, but then I heard it again. It wasn't muffled like it would have been if she were outside. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. Her tone was wrong. Not casual, not joking. Frantic, almost angry. I sat up, heart thudding, and listened. "Why is she yelling?" I muttered, still half asleep. My first thought was that she and Matt had fought and she'd come home upset. I swung my feet out of bed and shuffled into the dark hallway. I flipped on the light and walked toward the stairs. From downstairs, I heard her call my name again, louder this time. "What is it?" I called back. No answer. The way she'd said my name stuck with me. There was an urgency to it that put me on edge, but it also sounded off, like my sister's voice run through a filter. I started down the stairs, running my hand along the wall to find the foyer light switch. For some reason, I couldn't locate it right away. The darkness downstairs felt thicker than usual, like it was pressing in. "Where's the stupid switch?" I muttered, still feeling around. "Come here," Jasmine's voice yelled again, this time from the direction of her kitchen. My stomach dropped. There was something wrong in the way she said it. It sounded exactly like her, and not like her at the same time. I finally found the kitchen switch and flipped it on. The fluorescent light buzzed to life, flickering before it fully brightened. The glare washed over the entire downstairs, living room, kitchen, part of the hallway. Empty. "Hello," I called, stepping further in. Silence. The kind that feels almost physical, like cotton in your ears. I walked down the short hall to her bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I paused, then pushed it open. Her bed was neatly made, nightstand untouched, nothing out of place. No coat tossed over a chair, no shoes by the door, no sign she'd come home. "Jasmine," I called, my voice wobbling, no reply. I turned to leave, shaking, and that's when I heard it. A loud, solid thud from her room, the room I was already in. The same room I just scanned and found completely still. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. Slowly, I stepped back into the room, eyes sweeping from corner to corner. Light from the hallway spilled in, casting long, thin shadows across the floor. Nothing had moved. Nothing looked different. The bed, the dresser, the lamp, everything exactly as it had been seconds earlier. My nerves snapped. I backed out, turned, and hurried upstairs, taking the steps too fast. I shut my bedroom door, locked it, and leaned against it, breathing hard. I grabbed my phone and called Jasmine. No answer. I called again and again, straight to voicemail or endless ringing. I sat on my bed, staring at the locked door, feeling every tiny creak of the house like it was someone outside my room. I kept replaying her voice in my head, how it had sounded like her but wrong. Eventually, exhaustion wore me down, and I fell into a rough, restless sleep with the phone still in my hand. In the morning, sunlight through the window made the night feel surreal, like a bad dream. Then I checked my phone. A text from Jasmine. "Why did you call me at 1 a.m.? Everything okay?" My stomach nodded. I texted back, "Were you home last night? I swear I heard you downstairs." Her reply came almost immediately. "No, I stayed at Matt's." I went downstairs in broad daylight, determined to find some rational explanation. Everything looked normal. Her bedroom was just as I'd left it. The living room, kitchen, and hallway all looked untouched. Then I noticed a faint scuff mark on the floor near her bedroom door. I was almost certain it hadn't been there the day before. As I stood there staring at it, a faint acrid smell hit me. Metallic, sharp, like rust, or old blood. I bolted upstairs, locked my door, and spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that fatigue, the horror movie, and an overactive imagination had created the whole thing. I'm still not sure I believe myself. The gas station where I worked nights was always too quiet in November. The cold seemed to seep through every crack, no matter how high we cranked the thermostat. Frost painted the pumps outside in a thin, silvery film. Even inside, you could sometimes see your breath if you stood too close to the door. I'd taken the night shift because I needed the extra pay. Nobody else wanted it. Between the cold, the isolation, and the kinds of people who drifted in after midnight, it often felt less like a job and more like a punishment. The station sat on the edge of town, just far enough off the main road that we didn't get much traffic. That night, I hadn't seen a single customer in over an hour. I was behind the counter, hunched near the tiny space heater under my stool, scrolling through my phone in an effort to stay awake. The glow of the screen was oddly comforting, a little island of normalcy in a pool of fluorescent light and empty aisles. Then the bell over the door jingled. I looked up, expecting one of our regulars, a trucker, a weary commuter, someone I'd recognize. Instead, a man stepped inside wearing a thick hooded jacket pulled up so far I couldn't see his face. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He didn't answer. He walked straight past the counter toward the back of the store, his boots squeaking faintly on the tile. Something about the way he moved made my skin prickle. He looked like he was trying a little too hard to act casual. I tried to shrug it off. People came in tired, grumpy, drunk. You couldn't read too much into anyone's mood on the night shift. Still, I kept an eye on him from the corner of my vision while pretending to scroll my phone. He lingered by the snacks, picking up a bag of chips, putting it back, then doing the same with a candy bar. Non-committal. Like shopping was the last thing on his mind. A minute or two later, the bell over the door jingled again. 2 more men came in. They were dressed almost exactly like the first, heavy jackets, hoods up, faces shadowed. Neither said a word. One drifted to the drink coolers. The other stopped near the magazine rack. My heart rate picked up. 3 men, all similarly dressed, all acting strange, all in an almost empty station in the middle of the night. It could have been nothing. A group of friends on a road trip maybe, but the air felt wrong. The first guy finally walked up to the counter and set a pack of gum down in front of me. "That'll be 99 cents, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. He didn't reach for his wallet. He just stared at me. His hands flattened on the counter. His hood shaded most of his face, but I could see his eyes. Flat, cold, utterly unreadable. Behind him, his 2 buddies had stopped pretending to shop. They stood by the door now, one on each side, effectively blocking it. "Look, man," the guy in front of me said quietly. "Let's make this simple. Open the register." My brain stalled. I just stared at him. "Open it," he repeated, sharper this time. I swallowed and punched in the code. The drawer slid open with its usual mechanical clink, revealing maybe $70 in mixed bills. He reached over, scooped up the cash, and stuffed it into his pocket. "Now the safe," he said. I don't have the code," I stammered. "Only the manager does. It's on a timer. I couldn't open it even if I tried." He leaned closer. I could see his breath in the air between us, little puffs of white. "Don't lie to me," he said. "I'm not," I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "I swear, it's on a time lock." For a few seconds, his eyes searched my face like he was trying to decide if he believed me. One of the other men murmured something I couldn't catch. The guy at the counter straightened and scowled. "Fine," he said, "but if you call the cops, we'll know." They turned and walked out. The bell over the door jingled once, nastily cheerful in the silence they left behind. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, my heart pounding in my ears. The store suddenly felt colder than it had all night. After what felt like a long time, I forced my hands to move. I locked the door, picked up the phone, and called the police. My fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped it. Officers showed up about 20 minutes later, long after the men had disappeared into the night. I gave them descriptions as best as I could. Hoods, coats, average builds, not much to work with. The security cameras were old, grainy, and mostly useless. "You did the right thing," my manager said later. "Money can be replaced, you can't." I knew he was right, but his reassurance didn't erase the image burned into my mind. 3 men with empty, emotionless eyes, moving through that too quiet station like they owned it. After that night, every shift felt different. The gas station wasn't just cold and lonely anymore. It felt like the kind of place where bad things happen, and where the people who do them might walk in at any time, silent and hooded, pretending to buy gum.